Richard Harrison had spent decades building one of the largest business empires in the country. His name appeared on magazine covers, financial news channels, and charity galas, yet the success that surrounded him failed to bring peace to his heart. Behind the expensive suits and luxury cars was a man who had grown deeply disappointed in people. Employees smiled only when they wanted promotions. Distant relatives suddenly appeared whenever they needed money. Even strangers often treated others based on appearance rather than character. After witnessing years of selfishness, Richard began to wonder whether genuine kindness still existed or whether it had become nothing more than a beautiful story people like to tell. Determined to find the answer for himself, Richard came up with an unusual plan. Instead of relying on surveys or reports, he would quietly observe how ordinary people treated someone they believed had nothing to offer. He dressed in faded clothes collected from a local shelter, rubbed dirt onto his hands, and wore an old wool cap that hid his familiar face. His expensive watch and jewelry stayed locked inside a safe. Looking into the mirror, even he barely recognized himself as evening settled over the city. Dark clouds gathered and a chilly wind swept through the streets. Richard chose a quiet park where office workers, students, and families passed every day. He lay down on an old wooden bench, pretending to be asleep. His breathing became slow and steady as he carefully slipped a worn wallet halfway out of his pocket, creating an easy temptation for anyone with dishonest intentions. Minutes turned into hours. Some pedestrians glanced at him before quickly looking away. Others wrinkled their noses in disgust. A few even laughed as they walked past. One man reached toward the exposed wallet but hurried away after noticing nearby security cameras. Richard remained perfectly still, silently observing every reaction. Just as the sun disappeared below the skyline and the cold grew harsher, the soft footsteps of a young newspaper boy approached the lonely bench. Completely unaware that his next decision was about to change two lives forever, the young newspaper boy stopped beside the bench and looked carefully at the old man lying there. His name was Noah Carter, and although he was only 12 years old, life had forced him to grow up much faster than most children. Every morning before school and every evening afterward, he sold newspapers to earn enough money for food and medicine for his grandmother. His shoes were worn, his jacket was patched in several places, and the few coins in his pocket represented nearly everything he had earned that day. Noah gently called out, "Sir, are you okay?" Receiving no answer, he noticed the man's pale face and trembling hands. Believing the stranger had not eaten all day, Noah looked across the street at a small food cart. He hesitated for only a moment. The money in his hand was supposed to buy bread and milk for home, but he couldn't ignore someone who seemed to be suffering. He crossed the road and spent nearly all of his earnings on a steaming bowl of soup and a small loaf of bread. Returning to the bench, Noah carefully placed the food beside the sleeping man. He softly shook his shoulder once more, but Richard continued pretending to sleep. Worried that the food would grow cold, Noah whispered, "I hope you wake up soon. You need this more than I do." The evening wind became even colder. Without thinking twice, Noah removed his own faded jacket, the only one he owned, and gently draped it over the old man's shoulders. He rubbed the stranger's hands together for a few seconds, hoping to warm them, then stepped back with a small smile. Before leaving, Noah quietly said, "I don't have much, but I hope tomorrow is kinder to you than today." Beneath his closed eyelids, Richard felt tears gathering. No one had spoken to him with such sincere compassion in years. For the first time since beginning his strange experiment, pretending to sleep became harder than staying awake. Because the kindness of one poor boy was breaking the walls around his heart. Noah had only taken a few steps away when a burst of laughter echoed through the nearly empty park. 3 older teenagers wandered toward the bench, pointing at the sleeping man as if he were part of a joke. One of them picked up a small pebble and tossed it toward Richard, chuckling when it bounced off the bench. Another reached for the loaf of bread Noah had left beside him, intending to throw it into a nearby trash can. Before they could continue, Noah hurried back. "Please don't do that," he said firmly, standing between the teenagers and the old man. "He hasn't done anything to you." The boys laughed at Noah's worn clothes and told him to mind his own business. One shoved him lightly aside, but Noah refused to leave. Though smaller and clearly outmatched, he stood his ground. "If you want to joke around, find someone who can defend themselves," he said. "Leave him alone." The teenagers exchanged annoyed looks. After a few moments of mocking Noah, they finally walked away, muttering insults under their breath. Richard remained motionless, but every word reached his ears. He had expected people to ignore him, yet he had never imagined a child would risk being bullied to protect a complete stranger. The park grew quieter as darkness settled in. Noah glanced at the old man again, uncertain whether he should leave. He checked the time and realized he had already missed the last bus home. The walk back to his neighborhood would take more than an hour. But he couldn't shake the feeling that the stranger was still vulnerable. He sat on the far end of the bench, keeping watch while reading the unsold newspapers he still carried. Every few minutes he looked around to make sure no one approached with bad intentions. When a cold gust swept through the park, Noah noticed the old man's hands trembling beneath the jacket. Without hesitation, he removed the only pair of gloves he owned and carefully slipped them onto Richard's hands. Inside, Richard's heart ached. The gloves were old and worn, yet they carried a warmth that no amount of money could ever buy. As silent tears escaped beneath his closed eyes, he realized that the poorest boy he had ever met possessed a generosity greater than the fortunes of many billionaires. The next morning, Richard quietly ended his experiment before sunrise. He waited until Noah had disappeared down the street, then returned to his limousine, changed into his tailored suit, and resumed the role the world expected him to play. Yet his thoughts never left the brave young boy from the park. Instead of heading to his company's headquarters, Richard instructed his driver to follow Noah from a safe distance. He wanted to know who had raised a child with such extraordinary compassion. Noah's day began long before most people were awake. He stopped at a bakery just as it opened, using the few coins he had left to buy discounted bread. Then he walked several blocks to an aging apartment building with cracked walls and broken windows. Richard watched as Noah climbed the stairs carrying the bread and yesterday's unsold newspapers. From outside, Richard observed through an open kitchen window. Noah greeted his grandmother with a cheerful smile, hiding the exhaustion on his face. She sat in an old wheelchair, her hands trembling as she apologized for being unable to help. Noah simply knelt beside her, kissed her forehead, and assured her that everything would be all right. He prepared breakfast, helped her take her medicine, cleaned the tiny apartment, and made sure she was comfortable before putting on his school backpack. After school, instead of playing with friends, Noah returned to selling newspapers until sunset. Along the way, he stopped to refill a bowl of water for stray dogs and shared the last piece of his sandwich with a hungry little girl waiting outside a clinic with her mother. Every act of kindness came naturally, as though generosity was simply part of who he was. Richard felt overwhelmed. He had expected to uncover a hidden motive or discover that Noah wanted praise or reward. Instead, he found a child who quietly helped others despite having almost nothing himself. As the limousine rolled away, Richard stared out the window in silence. He realized that true character was revealed not in moments of comfort, but in the choices people made when life had given them every reason to think only of themselves. Several days later, Richard decided it was time for one final test. Through one of his trusted assistants, he arranged for Noah to be offered a part-time job at Harrison Estates. explaining only that the mansion needed extra help after school. Noah accepted immediately, grateful for the opportunity to earn enough money to buy better medicine for his grandmother. He had no idea that the owner of the estate was the same old man he had protected in the park. On Noah's first afternoon, the mansion seemed larger than anything he had ever imagined. Marble floors gleamed beneath crystal chandeliers, and priceless paintings decorated the walls. Some employees welcomed him warmly, but others looked down on the poorly dressed boy. They whispered that he would probably break something or quit after a single day. Noah heard every comment, yet he simply smiled politely and focused on his work. Richard watched everything through the estate's security cameras. He instructed his staff not to reveal his identity and quietly arranged a series of small temptations. The first came when a leather envelope containing several $1,000s was left on a hallway table where Noah was cleaning. Anyone could have slipped it into a pocket without being noticed. Noah picked it up, searched for the owner, and immediately handed it to the estate manager without counting a single bill. The following day, another employee secretly offered Noah cash in exchange for claiming he had completed work that had actually been left unfinished. Noah shook his head. "If I accept money I didn't earn," he replied, "I'll lose something much more valuable than the money itself." Richard listened to those words from his office and felt his throat tighten. The tests continued, but Noah never changed. He treated the gardeners with the same respect he showed the executives, thanked the kitchen staff after every meal, and stayed late to help an elderly janitor finish heavy work without being asked. As evening settled over the mansion, Richard realized the truth was undeniable. Noah's honesty, humility, and kindness were not acts performed for recognition. They were the foundation of his character. For the second time in a single week, the billionaire found himself wiping away tears, knowing he had finally met someone whose integrity could never be bought. A week later, Richard organized a grand charity gala at his mansion and invited business leaders, employees, journalists, and community members. Noah received an invitation as well, though he assumed he had simply been asked to help serve guests. Wearing the cleanest clothes he owned, he arrived feeling nervous but grateful for the opportunity. His grandmother encouraged him before he left, reminding him that kindness was worth more than expensive clothes or fine jewelry. As the evening reached its highlight, Richard stepped onto the stage and asked everyone to direct their attention to a large screen. The room fell silent as security footage from the park began to play. Guests watched the disguised billionaire lying motionless on the bench while dozens of people ignored him. Then Noah appeared. They saw the young boy spend his last coins on hot soup, cover the stranger with his own jacket, protect him from cruel teenagers, leave his gloves on the man's frozen hands, and quietly whisper words of hope before walking away. Many guests wiped away tears. Others lowered their heads in shame, realizing they might have walked past the same man without stopping. Richard turned toward Noah, whose face was filled with confusion as he slowly recognized the homeless man from the video standing before him in an elegant suit. With emotion in his voice, Richard confessed that the entire encounter had been a test of human compassion. "I pretended to sleep," he said, "because I wanted to know whether kindness still existed. I found my answer in a boy who had almost nothing, yet gave me everything." Richard embraced Noah in front of the audience before announcing that he would pay for Noah's education through medical school, provide the finest care for his grandmother, and create a charitable foundation to help children living in poverty. Noah thanked him, then made one humble request. "Please don't help only me," he said softly. "There are so many children who need a chance." The audience rose in a standing ovation. Tears streamed down Richard's face as he realized the greatest gift he had ever received was not loyalty from wealthy friends or success in business. but the compassion of a poor boy whose selfless heart had restored his faith in humanity forever.